You think posting about your weekend plans makes you independent, Lauren. It makes the rest of us look like we raised someone who doesn't care about family reputation. Your father had to field questions at the club yesterday because of that photo. Do you have any idea how that reflects on us? Patricia warned me you were drifting, but I didn't think you'd go this far. You're embarrassing the entire family with this "I don't need anyone" act. We have the cabin trip this weekend for a reason. It's time to remember who you are and what this family expects from you. Fix it before Friday, or the conversation at the cabin won't be pleasant for anyone, especially you. Hi, my name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 30 years old. That was my mother, Diane, standing in the middle of the open plan office, where I coordinated client campaigns for a small Nashville marketing firm. She had never visited before. The surprise visit turned every head in the room. My hands stayed steady on the desk, but my stomach dropped like the floor had vanished. I kept my voice even when I answered her. I told her I would think about the post. She left without another word, her heels sharp on the tile. The post in question was nothing dramatic. Just a quiet photo of me hiking alone near Percy Warner Park with the caption about enjoying my own company after a long week. To my mother, it was a public declaration that I was pulling away from the carefully curated family image she had spent decades polishing. In her world, every photo, every choice, every silence had to reinforce the idea that the Mitchells were stable close and above reproach. Any crack in that surface was treated like a threat. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on a client brief, but the conversation replayed in my head. Patricia Hayes, my mother's closest friend since before I was born, had apparently been feeding her information. Patricia had always been the one who just wanted to help with a concerned smile and a gentle suggestion that I was making things harder than they needed to be. I had brushed it off for years as typical family friend meddling. Now it felt heavier. That evening I sat in my apartment and stared at the group chat for the upcoming family trip. My parents had rented a cabin in the Smoky Mountains outside Gatlinburg for the long holiday weekend. The stated reason was reconnection and fresh air. The real reason, I suspected, was to gather everyone in one place where my mother could reinforce the family narrative without outside eyes watching. My father, Robert, had already texted that he was looking forward to some quality time. My Aunt Susan and Uncle Thomas were bringing their daughter, Sophia. My cousin Jordan, Patricia's son, had said he might drive up for a day or two. The group was small enough that every conversation would carry weight. I almost cancelled. Then I told myself I was being dramatic. One uncomfortable weekend was survivable. I packed a bag, replied to the chat that I would be there Friday afternoon, and went to bed. Friday traffic out of Nashville was heavy. I used the drive to steady myself. I had spent years learning to stay composed when my mother's expectations pressed in. I had built a life that felt like mine's steady work. I was good at a small circle of friends who didn't require performance therapy once a month with Dr. Karen Ellis to keep the old patterns from swallowing me. The cabin trip was just 4 days. I could manage 4 days. When I pulled up the gravel drive, the cabin looked exactly like the photos my mother had sent. Rustic but expensive, with a wide porch overlooking the valley. My mother was already on the porch with Patricia. They both smiled when I got out of the car. Patricia waved and called out that I looked tired from the drive. My mother said nothing about the office visit. Instead, she asked if I wanted help carrying my bag. The performance had already begun. Dinner that first night was polite on the surface. My father talked about a golf tournament he was looking forward to in the spring. Aunt Susan asked about my work. I gave short, neutral answers. Patricia kept steering the conversation toward family traditions and how important it was to present a united front to the wider community back home. Every time she said united, her eyes flicked toward me. Later that evening, I stepped onto the back deck to get some air. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia appeared at the top of my screen. It was clearly meant for my mother. The preview showed enough that I opened it before I could stop myself. Don't stress about Lauren this weekend. I'll back you up when you bring up the social media thing. We can make it sound like we're all just worried about her well-being. If the others see it as concern instead of control, they'll side with us. She'll fall in line or she'll look difficult. Either way, the family image stays clean. I read it twice, then a third time. The words were calm, almost gentle, fake concern masking the real plan. They were going to use the weekend to pressure me in front of everyone, framing it as care so that any resistance would make me the problem. Patricia had been helping shape the narrative for longer than I realized. I stood on the deck with the cold mountain air on my face and felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger yet, something quieter and sharper. The kind of clarity that arrives when a long-heeled suspicion is suddenly confirmed in writing. I saved a screenshot without replying. Then I walked back inside, smiled at the group still talking in the living room, and said I was tired. From the drive, no one questioned it. My mother told me which bedroom was mine. Patricia added that fresh air and a family time would do me good. I closed the bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed. The text glowed on my phone screen. Outside, the voices continued warm and normal sounding. Inside, the weekend that was supposed to be about reconnection now had a countdown I could feel in my ribs. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time the floor creaked in the hallway, I wondered who was still awake and what they were planning to say in the morning. The cabin was supposed to be a place to relax. Instead, it had become the place where the mask my mother had spent years maintaining was starting to slip in real time. By the time the sun came up over the ridges, I already knew the next 3 days were going to test every boundary I had quietly built, and I knew that whatever happened, I was no longer willing to pretend the image mattered more than the truth sitting in my phone. I woke before anyone else the next morning, the screenshot of Patricia's text still open on my phone. The words hadn't changed overnight. They sat there plain and careful, dressed up as concern. I saved the image to a folder I kept for things I might need later, then deleted the notification so no one would see it if they glanced at my screen. My mother's voice carried from the kitchen light and pleasant, asking Patricia if she wanted coffee. Patricia answered with the same warm tone she had always used around our family. The performance was already underway. I got dressed and joined them. My father was at the table reading something on his tablet. Aunt Susan and Uncle Thomas were still upstairs with their daughter Sophia. The cabin felt smaller than it had the night before. Every casual question now carried an extra layer. My mother asked how I had slept, her eyes flicking to my phone for half a second before she smiled again. I told her I was fine. Patricia added that fresh mountain air usually helped people see things more clearly. I nodded and poured myself coffee without answering. The first real pressure came after breakfast. We were still clearing plates when my mother brought up the social media post in front of everyone who was in the room. She framed it the way Patricia's text had suggested she would. I saw that picture you posted last week, Lauren, the one from your hike. It just made me wonder if everything's all right with you. People in our circle ask about you, you know. They want to know you're doing well. Patricia nodded right on cue. It's only because we care. When someone steps back from family the way you have lately, it raises questions. We don't want anyone getting the wrong idea about how close we all are. My father looked up from his tablet but didn't speak. Aunt Susan glanced between us and then down at her plate. Uncle Thomas cleared his throat and said something about the weather. The room went quiet in a way that felt deliberate. I kept my voice steady when I answered. I posted a photo of a trail I like. It didn't say anything about the family. If people are asking questions, maybe they should ask me directly. My mother's smile stayed in place, but her eyes hardened for a moment. That's not how it works, sweetheart. Everything we do reflects on everyone else. You know that. Patricia reached over and touched my mother's arm like they were sharing a private worry. She's just protective, Lauren. We all are. This weekend is supposed to be about getting back on the same page. I felt the old, familiar heat rise in my chest, the same feeling I used to get when I was younger, and tried to push back. I swallowed it down and stayed seated. I didn't want to give them the scene they seemed ready for. Instead, I excused myself to the porch phone in hand. I texted Taylor Brooks, the colleague who had become a steady friend over the last couple of years. She knew the broad outlines of my family situation from late-night work conversations. Text from Patricia, meant for my mum, just landed in my phone. They're planning to use this weekend to gently pressure me about staying in line with the family image. Screenshot attached. I'm okay, but it's already started. Taylor replied within minutes. That's not gentle. That's coordinated. You don't have to play along. If you need an out, call me. I can say work emergency if it helps. Her words gave me something solid to hold on to. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and stayed on the porch a little longer, watching the valley. The quiet helped. When I went back inside, Jordan Hayes had arrived. Patricia's son was a few years older than me, quiet by nature, and had always kept a little distance from the tighter family circles. He greeted everyone politely and then caught my eye for a second longer than necessary. I wondered if he had seen versions of this before. Lunch was another round of careful conversation. My mother steered it toward upcoming community events back home and how important it was for the family to show up together. Patricia backed every point with small agreements and gentle reminders that appearances matter when you've built something like we have. My father mostly listened. Aunt Susan looked uncomfortable but didn't interrupt. Uncle Thomas changed the subject twice to sports scores. Sophia, who was 12, kept her head down and ate quietly. After lunch, Jordan asked if I wanted to walk one of the trails behind the cabin. We went a short distance up the path where the trees thinned enough to see the ridge. He didn't waste time with small talk. I saw the way Aunt Diane and my mum were tag-teaming you at breakfast. They've done versions of that with other people before. Usually it works because no one wants to be the one who looks difficult. I kept my voice low. They're using this weekend to make me the problem in front of everyone. Patricia texted my mum last night about how to frame it so the others side with them. Jordan nodded once, slow and thoughtful. I figured something like that was happening. My mum has always been good at sounding reasonable while she's pushing her own version of things. If you push back, she'll make it about protecting the family. She's done it for years. He didn't offer advice or take sides out loud. He just walked with me a little farther and then said he would be around if I needed someone who wasn't already in their script. It was small, but it mattered. One person who wasn't automatically lining up with the performance. By late afternoon, the pressure had spread. My mother asked me in front of Aunt Susan and Uncle Thomas whether I had thought about deleting the post yet. She used the same soft, concerned tone she had used at the office. It would mean a lot to your father and me if you took care of that before we all head back. It's such a small thing, but it would keep the questions from spreading. Patricia added, we're only saying this because we've seen how quickly small misunderstandings can turn into bigger stories. Better to handle it now while we're all together. Aunt Susan looked at me and then at my mother. She didn't speak right away. Uncle Thomas shifted in his chair. I felt the room waiting to see what I would do. I stayed calm on the outside. Inside, something was settling into place. They were not going to stop. The text had not been a one-time slip. It was the method they had used for years, dressed up as care. I met my mother's eyes and answered without raising my voice. I'm not deleting it. The post wasn't about the family. If people have questions, they can ask me. I'm not going to manage everyone else's opinions for you. The silence that followed was heavier than before. My mother's expression didn't change, but Patricia's smile tightened at the edges. Aunt Susan looked down at her hands. Uncle Thomas cleared his throat again. Jordan, who had come back inside, stayed near the doorway and didn't jump in to smooth anything over. The division was visible now, even if no one named it yet. My mother stood up and said she needed to check on something in the kitchen. Patricia followed her. The others stayed where they were. No one defended me out loud, but no one defended the pressure either. The quiet felt like its own kind of choice. I stepped outside again and texted Taylor one more line. They just tried it again in front of everyone. I said no. Sides are starting to show. She answered quickly. Good. You're allowed to say no. Don't let them rewrite it as you being difficult. You're just refusing to play the role anymore. I put the phone away and stayed on the porch until the light started to fade. Inside, voices rose and fell in careful patterns. I could hear my mother and Patricia talking in low tones near the sink. I didn't need to hear the words to know they were adjusting the script now that I had refused the first move. The rest of the evening passed in the same careful tension. Dinner was polite on the surface. My father tried to steer talk toward the next day's plans. Aunt Susan asked Sophia about school. No one brought up the post again, but the absence of the topic felt louder than the conversation. Jordan sat across from me and didn't add much, but every time Patricia tried to steer something toward family unity, he changed the subject to something neutral. When people started heading to their rooms, my mother stopped me in the hallway. Her voice was quiet, the concern still in place. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Lauren. We're only trying to keep things from getting messy. You know how people talk. I looked at her for a moment. The hallway light made her face look older than I remembered. I thought about all the years she had framed every boundary I tried to set as selfishness or instability. I thought about the text still saved on my phone. I know exactly how people talk, I said, and I know who's been helping shape what they say. She didn't answer. Patricia appeared at the end of the hall and called her name softly. My mother turned and walked toward her without looking back. I went into my room and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in my hand. The screenshot was still there. I opened the folder and looked at it again. The words hadn't softened. They were still calm, still reasonable sounding, still a plan to manage me in front of the people who mattered to them. Outside the door, I could hear low voices. My mother and Patricia were talking again. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough. They were deciding how to handle the rest of the weekend now that I had refused the first request. Patricia said something about making sure the others understood I was going through something. My mother agreed in the same quiet tone. I turned off the light and lay back. The cabin was dark and quiet, except for those voices. I thought about Taylor's offer of an out. I thought about Jordan's quiet presence. I thought about how many times over the years I had stayed silent because speaking up would have made me the difficult one in the story they were telling. The weekend still had 2 days left. They were not finished. And neither was I. The next morning, the cabin felt different. The light coming through the windows was the same soft mountain gold, but the air inside had tightened. Breakfast was quiet at first. My father read the paper. Aunt Susan helped Sophia with her pancakes. Uncle Thomas asked about trail conditions. My mother and Patricia sat at the end of the table, speaking in the low, reasonable voices they had perfected over years of managing appearances. Patricia started at this time. She turned toward me with that same gentle smile and said, "Lauren, your mother and I were talking last night. We think it would be good for everyone if we cleared the hour before we all head home tomorrow." Small things like that post can grow if we don't address them together. My mother nodded, her expression warm and concerned. We're not asking you to change who you are. We're just asking you to think about how your choices land on the rest of us. That's what family does. I set my fork down. The room went still. Jordan, who had stayed the night, looked up from his plate but didn't interrupt yet. Aunt Susan's hands stilled on Sophia's chair. I kept my voice, even the way I had learned to do in therapy sessions with Dr. Karen Ellis, when old patterns tried to pull me back under. I already told you I'm not deleting it, and I'm not going to sit here and let you frame my life as something that needs managing in front of everyone. Patricia's smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. No one is managing you, Lauren. We're protecting the family from unnecessary questions. There's a difference. My mother leaned forward slightly. You've always been sensitive about these things. That's why we have to be careful how we talk about it. If you were just, I cut her off, still calm. If I would just stay quiet and let you decide what version of me everyone sees. That's what you mean. The silence after that was different. It wasn't polite anymore. It was the sound of sides settling into place. Aunt Susan looked at my mother and then at me. She didn't speak, but she didn't nod along with Patricia either. Uncle Thomas shifted in his seat and suddenly became very interested in his coffee. Sophia kept her eyes on her plate. Jordan set his fork down slowly and spoke for the first time that morning. She's not being sensitive. She's refusing to let you rewrite her choices so they fit the story you want to tell. I've watched you do this before. It always ends with the other person apologizing for having a life that doesn't match the picture. Patricia turned toward him, her voice still soft but colder underneath. Jordan, this isn't your place. It became my place when you texted Aunt Diane about how to handle her in front of the rest of us, he said. He didn't raise his voice. He just stated it. I saw the screenshot too, the one that was supposed to stay between the two of you. My mother's face went still. Patricia's hand tightened around her coffee mug. The mask slipped for half a second, long enough for everyone at the table to see the calculation underneath. Then my mother recovered and tried the concerned tone again. Lauren, if you're going to twist private conversations into something ugly, maybe this weekend wasn't the right time for any of us to be together. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, a small, sharp sound in the quiet room. You're right. It wasn't. I'm leaving. My father finally spoke. Lauren, don't do anything rash. We can talk this through. I looked at him. He had spent decades staying out of these conversations, letting my mother and Patricia shape the narrative. His voice was tired, more than angry. I felt a flicker of old sadness, but it didn't change what I had to do. I've spent years talking through it. The talking always ends with me being asked to shrink so the family picture stays clean. I'm done shrinking. I walked to the bedroom I had used and packed the few things I had brought. No one followed me at first. Then Jordan appeared in the doorway. You don't have to explain, he said quietly. Just know that not everyone here thinks you're the problem. I nodded. Thank you for saying it out loud. It matters. When I came back, out with my bag, my mother was waiting near the door. Patricia stood a step behind her. My mother's voice was low and tight, now the concern stripped away. You're really going to walk out in the middle of this? After everything we've done to keep this family looking whole, I met her eyes. You didn't keep it whole. You kept the picture of it whole. There's a difference. And I'm not going to keep pretending there isn't. Patricia tried one last time, her tone still reasonable. Lauren, if you leave like this, people are going to ask questions. That's exactly what we were trying to avoid. Then let them ask, I said. And let them ask me. I'm done letting the two of you answer for me. I walked past them to the door. Aunt Susan caught my eye as I passed. She looked like she wanted to say something but stayed silent. Uncle Thomas gave a small nod that could have meant anything. Sophia watched with wide eyes. My father stayed at the table, staring at his hands. I drove down the mountain road with the windows down. The air was cool and smelled like pine and damp earth. My phone buzzed once on the seat beside me. Another text from Patricia, this one sent only to me. I hope you know what you're doing. Your mother is devastated. Some things are bigger than one person's feelings. I didn't reply. I pulled over at a scenic overlook halfway down and read it again. Then I took another screenshot and saved it with the first one. Evidence in case I ever needed to remember exactly how they had tried to end it. By the time I reached Nashville, the sun was low. My apartment felt smaller and quieter than I remembered. I set my bag down and stood in the middle of the living room for a long moment. The weekend had ended early. The family connection I had tried to protect for years was gone in any real, everyday sense. There would be no more careful group chats about holidays, no more pretending the pressure was love. The silence that had protected them for so long had finally broken, and the cost was the version of family I had once believed in. I texted Taylor that I was home and safe. She replied with a single line, "You did the hard thing. Proud of you." I texted Jordan too, just to say thank you again. He answered that he would be around if I ever wanted to talk, no pressure. It was small, but it was real. That night, I sat on the couch with my phone and looked at the two screenshots side by side. The first one from the cabin, the second one from the drive home. They were calm. They were reasonable sounding. They were the same method my mother and Patricia had used for years. Fake concern as a tool to keep me inside the picture they had built. The facade had cracked because I stopped holding it up. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel free in the way stories sometimes promise. I felt the empty space where the old version of family had been. It was lonely in a way I hadn't let myself feel before. But underneath, the loneliness was something steadier. I had said no in front of everyone who mattered to them. I had chosen the truth over the image. And I was still here. Dr. Karen Ellis had once told me that boundaries don't always bring the other person closer. Sometimes they show you exactly how far apart you already were. I understood that now in a way I hadn't been ready to hear before. The weeks after the cabin trip were quiet. My mother didn't call. Patricia didn't text again. Aunt Susan sent one short message saying she was thinking of me, nothing more. My father sent a card for my birthday with his name signed and nothing else. The everyday connections had thinned to almost nothing. I didn't chase them. I went to work, saw Taylor for coffee, kept my monthly appointment with Dr. Ellis, and let the silence settle around the places where family used to be. Sometimes I still caught myself reaching for the old habit of softening my life so it wouldn't cause questions. Then I would remember the text on my phone and stop. The facade had required my cooperation. Without it, the picture they wanted couldn't hold. I don't know if my mother ever understood what she lost when I walked out of that cabin. I don't know if Patricia ever saw the difference between protecting a family and protecting a story about a family. I don't think I'll ever get those answers. The tension between us remains unresolved, and I've made peace with that. Some distances don't close. What I do know is this: I stopped being the person who kept their image intact at the cost of my own life. That choice cost me the version of family I had carried for 30 years. It also gave me back the version of myself I had been quietly protecting all along. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to choose between the picture your family wanted and the truth you could finally say out loud, drop enough in the comments if you understand. I'd like to know I'm not the only one who learned that silence only protects the people who benefit from the lie.